after I think the real catalyst of that disastrous Madison Square Garden racist, xenophobic, misogynist rally last week. Now the idea is, well, Harris may have the momentum.
Now we're in the final few hours of campaigning ahead of one of the most consequential US elections since, well, the last one. The polls suggest the Democrats may be creeping ahead in the race for the White House, but the focus right now is on those 7 swing states, among them North Carolina, where Donald Trump was campaigning last night.
Remember, this is the greatest political movement probably in the history of the world, in all fairness. And this is the movement that's going to bring our country back, and we can do it, and we can do it almost easily. It's going to be a little rough in places. They've taken us to levels that we never thought we'd have to worry about, with all these people and, murderers and drug lords and terrorists and we didn't have these problems. We didn't have these problems. Now we do. It's a big problem. But we're going to solve those problems, and we're going to solve them fast, and we're going to get back on track. And once we are, we're going to move like you've never seen before.
Kamala Harris has, as you would expect, been front and centre of the Democrat campaign, turning her hand to a comedy sketch on Saturday Night Live with the comedian and actor Maya Rudolph. I'm joined now by Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies at University College Dublin. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much, Theo.
Can I just start by asking, how do you think the next week is going to play out?
I think if I knew exactly how it played out, I'd be at the bookies.
Roughly.
And I wouldn't be talking to you as much as I like you.
Roughly.
I think we'll start with the fact that it's going to be a toss-up race. You've mentioned those swing states, and just to review them, in the North, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, in the Sun Belt, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. The last major set of polls has just dropped from New York Times and Siena. In 6 of those 7 races, the gap between Harris and Trump is 2%. In 5 of them, it's less than 1%. I think add to that the surprising overnight poll from Iowa, which could bring it into swing state territory. And we may not know this result even early Wednesday morning our time, which means beyond the question of Harris or Trump, we may also be in territory that we have to watch out for, which is that if Donald Trump loses narrowly, he will try to take the country into chaos again. He will try to proclaim falsely that the election is rigged. He will try to take this to courts, even though he stands little chance of winning the cases. He will put pressure on state legislators and state governors to overturn their results. And he even will press Republicans in Congress to prevent the certification of Kamala Harris as the next president of the U.S.
Can you enlighten us perhaps as to this why, and if you think it's right or wrong, I'd be interested to know. There seems to be a narrative building that Harris is pulling ahead at the last moment.
Well, the U.S. media tends to run on feelings rather than actually dealing with facts. And if I could take you back just a bit, Theo, the feeling after Harris replaced Biden, given that Biden was handing the keys to the White House to Trump, is Harris is surging. And she pulled this to an even race. Now, in September, even though she defeated Trump handily in the one debate they had, she didn't pull 10 points ahead. You wouldn't have expected that. But then the media said, oh, she stalled out. Oh, it's Trump who has the momentum. Now, when we realize that Trump, in fact, is not pulling ahead, and indeed, after I think the real catalyst of that disastrous Madison Square Garden racist, xenophobic, misogynist rally last week, now the idea is, well, Harris may have the momentum. But I think, Theo, one thing backing this, if we went with facts, is the early voting. It's not just the fact that 74 million Americans have early voted so far. That's 44% of the entire total we had in 2020. It's 2 things beyond that. One is a high turnout overall, both early and on election day, tends to favor Harris rather than Trump. And secondly, in early voting, more women than men are voting early. And we know that Harris has an advantage of about 15% amongst women, as opposed to Trump's 12% advantage amongst men.
I spoke to one strategist yesterday, a Democrat strategist yesterday, who was highlighting the issue of abortion being particularly pertinent to educated young women in this election, and making that acting as a real catalyst to their voting in this election. Is that something that you're seeing as well, and you'd concur with?
I had said months ago, not that I'm always right, but it was just my opinion, that women's rights, especially reproductive rights, could be the decisive issue amongst many key issues because of the fact that almost half of American states now effectively ban abortion, and that affects millions of women. And I think it does reinforce that gender gap I just mentioned. And that in turn is bolstered by the fact that 10 states, including two swing states, Arizona and Nevada, have abortion referenda. Now, that will increase turnout, probably especially amongst young women, and that will tend to break for the Democrats. So, yes, women's rights could be the key to Kamala Harris getting into the White House.
And just my final question, beyond anything that happens next week or indeed the week after in terms of challenges from Donald Trump, let's say that Harris wins. And that is, of course, it's not a statement of fact by any stretch. Do you think it is overly optimistic to suggest that with a Harris win, that the political debate and discourse in America will quieten down for a bit? Or do you think that actually things are going to be quite rough for a few months, even years to come?
Let me just speak to you, Theo, just as a native of America rather than an analyst for a minute. And that is that America has been a politically damaged country this century. It's gone through a whole series of shocks going back to 9/11. One of the two candidates in this race, and you know which one it is, exploited that damage. He brought America to breaking point in January 2021. He effectively tried to overthrow the system by blocking the transfer of power. He is a convicted felon. He is trying to tear down the legal system to protect himself. So whoever wins, Trump or Harris, America will still have a challenge ahead of it. But what I hope is that despite the loud spectacle of that one candidate on the Trumpist side, that there are enough good people in America that we can get back to dialogue rather than division, get back to issues rather than social media confrontation. It is a long road back, but the American system so far has bent and not broken. And it's my hope that it can repair as well after November.
You raised one point there about it going back to 9/11, but do you also think that actually what the financial crash in 2008 and the fact that so many Americans, especially in what we term here in Britain as the flyover states, their standard of living has not been what it was in the 20th century. In that post-war era, the boom in your economy, those benefits have not been felt this century, that actually with competition from the likes of China, Far East economies, that actually America has had its day economically. And actually that is what Trump, with Make America Great Again, with that narrative about America first, he has managed to capitalize on so effectively. Is that an analysis that you would agree with as well? Or you actually think it goes back to those terrible events on September the 11th, 2001?
It goes back to 9/11, but you should be in this analyst seat because you've summarized it so well that after the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, people felt scared. They felt resentful. They felt angry. And America still is trying to deal with the effects, indeed, as the UK is, of that moment. And Donald Trump is, to use a character from American myth, for the American West, he's a snake oil salesman. He promised quick fixes. He, in fact, didn't fix anything while he was president. I could talk about that in another interview. In fact, he left the economy in a worse position, in part because of coronavirus and his disastrous way of handling it than when he entered office. But he continues to try to exploit that. All I can give you are the facts. And sometimes the facts don't break through. That America had 9% inflation 2 years ago. It's now below 3%. That America has a 3.5% growth rate, something that would make the UK quite envious. And America still has 73% of the global power amongst companies. So America still has a very strong economy. The need to spread those benefits amongst people is still the challenge there. But if we get to issues rather than spectacle, I wouldn't say Donald Trump's necessarily the guy who could pull that off, as opposed to pulling off the snake oil salesman's pitch.